Where was God before here existed? Before heaven had a throne? Before angels had a place to stand? Before space stretched outward and time took its first very breath? When light first tore through the darkness and the universe inhaled for the first time, where was he? Was God standing outside of creation, watching it unfold from a distant heaven? Was he already present, woven into every particle, every heartbeat, every atom coming into being? Or is the answer something far stranger, something that doesn't fit into here or there at all? If heaven itself had a beginning, and time itself came into existence, then where was God before there was a place for God to be? This question does something unsettling. It strips away direction. It removes location. It leaves the mind reaching for ground that no longer exists. And that silence you feel right now is not confusion. It is the edge of revelation. These are not questions you solve. They are questions you step into. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you won't just have an answer. You'll realize you've been standing inside it your whole life. This is the Kingdom Questions, where we slow down long enough to ask the questions Scripture invites, but comfort avoids. And to begin this journey, we have to do something most of us rarely do. We have to stop rushing toward answers long enough to examine the question itself. Let's slow down for a moment and really sit with this. Where was God before heaven existed? Not where do we imagine him to be, not where tradition places him, but where he actually was. Because the moment we ask this question, something uncomfortable happens. Our instincts take over. We start looking for direction, up, out there, beyond the stars. We picture God occupying a place, even if it is a holy one, a throne, a realm, a location called heaven. But here's the tension. Heaven itself had a beginning. Scripture tells us that heaven and earth were created. That means there was a moment when heaven did not yet exist, and yet God did. So if heaven was created, God cannot depend on heaven for his existence. He cannot be contained by something that came into being after him. This forces us to confront something deeper. The question is not simply where God was. The question is whether our idea of where applies to God at all. Because where assumes space, and space assumes distance, and distance assumes limitation. But God existed before space existed, before there was above or below, before near or far, before inside or outside. So what are we really asking when we say, where was God? Are we asking about location, or are we revealing the limits of how we think? If God existed before location itself, can he be described by location at all? And if our minds are wired to think in places, positions, and directions, how do we even begin to understand a God who existed before all of them? What if the struggle isn't finding where God was, but unlearning how we measure existence? What if our thinking is the thing standing in the way? And if that's true, how many other questions about God have we been asking from the wrong frame entirely? Here's where we need to be honest about ourselves. We think in locations because we live inside them. Every part of human experience is anchored to place. You wake up somewhere. You travel from here to there. You look up, you look down, you move closer, you move away. Even our language betrays us. We say God is above. We say heaven is up there. We say God is far or near. But those words only make sense inside a universe with space. They only work because we are creatures who move through distance and time. So when we ask where was God before heaven existed, our minds instinctively try to place him somewhere, outside creation, above the cosmos, beyond the stars. But that instinct may be the very thing misleading us, because location is not a neutral concept, it is a created one. Space had a beginning, direction had a beginning, distance had a beginning. Before creation, there was no there to point to, no coordinates to measure, no framework to stand inside. And yet we keep trying to imagine God as though he needed one. This is why the question feels so frustrating. It sounds simple, but it refuses to settle. Because we are using tools shaped by creation to describe the one who existed before creation itself. It's like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon, or trying to describe color to someone who has never seen light. Our minds are powerful, but they are not infinite. They were designed to operate inside the world God made, not outside the reality God is. So when we ask where God was, we may not be asking a wrong question, but we may be asking it from the wrong category. And that leads us to something Scripture does that is both unsettling and beautiful, because the Bible itself seems to speak in two directions at once. It says heaven is God's throne, and then it says heaven cannot contain him. So which one is it? Is God seated in heaven, ruling from a place, or is God so vast that heaven itself exists within him? If heaven is God's throne, but heaven cannot contain him, then what exactly is heaven in relation to God? And if heaven is not where God is, something God expresses, what does that mean for the way we've imagined him all along? This is where Scripture does something unexpected. It doesn't give us a simple answer, it gives us a paradox. On one hand, God speaks clearly. Isaiah records the words of the Lord saying, "Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool." That sounds definitive. Heaven is presented as the seat of divine authority, the place of rule, the center of command. But then Scripture turns around and says something that seems to undo that image entirely. When Solomon dedicates the temple, he pauses and says, "Will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you." Let that settle. Heaven is called God's throne, and yet heaven cannot contain him. So heaven is associated with God's rule, but not capable of holding God's being. That means heaven is not God's residence in the way we imagine. It is not a container. It is not a boundary. Heaven functions as an expression of God's authority, not the limit of his presence. This is where our categories begin to collapse, because if heaven cannot contain God, then God does not live inside heaven. And if God does not live inside heaven, then heaven itself must exist in relation to God, not the other way around. Which means heaven is not where God is. Heaven is something God brings into being, a realm shaped by him, sustained by him, governed by him, but not equal to him. And suddenly the original question shifts. We are no longer asking where was God before heaven existed. We are asking something far unsettling. What if heaven itself depends on God for existence, the same way creation does? What if heaven is not God's environment, but something that emerged from him? And if that is true, then where does God actually exist? If not in heaven, not in space, not in time, then what kind of existence are we even talking about? Here is where the shift happens. God did not exist in a place before heaven. He existed in himself. Before space had dimensions, before time had sequence, before heaven had form or structure. There was no environment surrounding God. God was the environment. Like an author is not inside the story exists inside the author. He did not occupy reality. Reality flowed out of him. This is why Scripture never describes God as coming from somewhere. There is no origin point, no source behind the source. When God reveals his name to Moses, he does not say, "I was formed." He does not say, "I came into being." He simply says, "I am." Not past, not future. Being itself. God is not sustained by anything outside himself. He is self-existent, uncreated, unlimited. No space to contain him, no time to age him, no dimension to surround him. Heaven did not give God a throne. God gave heaven the ability to exist. Creation did not become the stage where God arrived. Creation became the expression of a God who already was. This changes everything, because it means that before there was a where, God already was. Before there was a when, God already was. Before there was anything that could be measured, named, or observed, God already was. He did not wait in emptiness. He did not drift in nothingness. He did not need creation to complete him. He existed in perfect fullness, complete within himself, lacking nothing. Which means heaven is not God's home. Heaven is God's work. And space is not where God lives. Space is something God spoke. And time is not something God moves through. Time is something God allows creation to experience. So if God existed before heaven, not in a place, not in a realm, but in himself, then what does that mean for the way we think about God now? What does it mean for the idea of distance between God and humanity? What does it mean for moments when God feels far away? And if all things exist within him, what does that say about where you are right now? What does it mean to live inside the presence of a God who has never needed a place to be present? And if that's true, how could God ever be absent from you at all? This is where the mystery stops being abstract. Because if God does not need a place to exist, then he does not need perfect conditions to be present. If God existed before heaven, then heaven is not a barrier you must reach to find him. And if all things exist within him, then distance from him is not a matter of location, it is a matter of awareness. Scripture puts it plainly in a way that almost sounds too simple. In him we live and move and have our being. Not near him, not approaching him, not traveling toward him. In him. That means your life is not unfolding outside of God's presence. It is unfolding inside it. Your joy exists within him. Your confusion exists within him. Your doubts exist within him. Even your silence exists within him. Which means God does not need to cross a gap to reach you. There is no gap to cross. He does not descend from heaven when you pray. He does not arrive when you finally get things right. He does not draw closer when you feel more spiritual. He has never been absent. What changes is not God's position. What changes is our perception. We live in a world that teaches us to think in distance, closer to God, farther from God, upward toward God. But God is not a destination. He is the reality. Everything exists inside. And if that is true, then moments when God feels far are not moments of abandonment. They are moments of disorientation. Not because God moved, but because our attention did. So let this question settle gently. If God is not somewhere else, what does it mean when you say you are seeking him? If God has never been distant, what are you actually searching for? And if you have always lived inside his presence, what does it mean to finally become aware of it? So now we return to the question we started with. Where was God before heaven existed? And more importantly, what does that answer mean for you right now? If something in you just shifted, if this question touched a place you didn't have words for before, then this journey isn't over. Subscribe to the Kingdom Questions, not for content, not for arguments, but for the kind of questions that don't just give answers, they change how you stand before God. We're walking this path slowly, together. So now we can answer the question clearly. Where was God before heaven existed? Not in a place, not in a realm, not waiting in emptiness. God was in himself, uncreated, eternal, unlimited. Before heaven had form, God already was. Before time had sequence, God already was. Before space had dimension, God already was. He did not come from somewhere. He did not emerge from nothing. He did not become. He simply is. Heaven did not give God a throne. God gave heaven existence. Creation did not become God's environment. Creation emerged from God's being. Which means heaven is not where God lives. Heaven is what God expressed. And if heaven itself exists within God, then nothing can exist outside of him. Not distance, not darkness, not doubt, not you. So when you ask where God is now, the answer has not changed. He is not farther than your prayers. He is not closer when you feel worthy. He is never moved. You have always lived inside his presence. And the question was never really about where God was. It was about whether we were willing to let go of small ideas so we could see a God who has never been confined by heaven, space, or time. So I'll leave you with this. If God has always been closer than your own breath, what would change in your life if you truly believed that today? This is the Kingdom Questions. If this stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring the questions that open eternity rather than close it, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because some questions don't just give answers, they change where you stand.